Hello, elephants in the room, and welcome to episode 4 of the European University Institute Equity, Diversity and Inclusion podcast, where we explore how different factors such as gender and gender identity, sex, race, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, religion or belief, disability, weight affect every part of our society, from our places of work to politics, from culture to history, food, and everything in between. We will also reflect together with our guests on the intersectionality of these factors, both within the same under-recognized groups presenting these characteristics and in the wider society. This podcast make all of us part of the conversation because we are all part of the story. My name is Giuseppe and I'm the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the EUI. This episode of our podcast will delve into the issue of abortion and reproductive rights, access to abortion care, and the way the law can protect but also obstruct bodily autonomy. To talk about this and much more, we are excited to have here with us Dr. Elena Caruso. Elena is a post-doctoral fellow at the University of Waterloo, where she works on the project entitled Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow, Self-Managed Abortion in Italy. Elena is also a visiting fellow at the law department of our own institute in Florence and a fellow of the International Reproductive and Sexual Health Law program based at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. Elena's field of interest encompasses abortion and Italian feminism and the wider field of reproductive rights, social movements, civil law tradition and rule of law. Elena, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you, Christina and Andrea. For me, it's a great pleasure to be here.
So, Elena, I was struck by reading your profile on your website where you say that you are both a researcher and an activist. And so I was wondering what this relation and how being an activist influences your research and the other way around. And after that, if you can also tell our listeners a little bit more on your area of research and why you are so passionate about reproductive rights and abortion care.
Thank you, Giuseppe. I think that chronologically, my activism came before my interest in this field, which it's feminism, it's reproductive issues. My activism started when I was in the high school in Catania. I come from Sicily, Italy, and I always been very active politically. And during the years of the law school, I joined, it was 2012, a feminist collective called Rivolta Pagina, which literally can be translated like turning page. And this collective that still exists gathers many feminists, and some of them were very active in the 70s in Italy, including in the abortion campaigns. When I started my PhD at Kent Law School in England in 2018, I had very clear how important it was for me to explore deeply that history and how this was important also to understand the contemporary issues that I was dealing with as an activist myself. And there were, of course, many important works on abortion and also on Italian feminism. I'm thinking being also here to the book entitled Women and the Reinvention of the Political by an UI alumna, Maud Brache, who is now a professor of modern European history at the University of Glasgow. But what I was interested in doing, it was writing, making the history of the relationship between the feminist movement and the abortion law reform in those years in Italy. And because I think that part of history is very important to understand what's going on now in Italy, but also I think it can speak more broadly about contemporary issues that we have when we talk about social movement, law reform, and when we talk about reproductive justice also in some other context. So at the time there was not so much legal analysis about this specific point. So that was my starting point. But today we say that, as you were asking in the question, is more my research to drive my public engagement on gender equality than the reverse. So there is a mutual connection between these two elements, of course. I can't imagine to be just one in a way.
It seems that one enriches very much the other and vice versa. So that's really interesting. I think also to hear for our researchers here at the UI that you can be both, right? And both an activist and a researcher. You talked about abortion law, the abortion law in Italy, and came to pass in 1978. So this year marks 45 years since the law was adopted. Maybe it could be interesting for our listeners to say something maybe very quickly about the law on abortion in Italy. I think the contribution that the feminist movement gave to passing of that law, and as you were saying before, it could be also that Italy is a good example of trends or patterns that we saw in the past, we are seeing today also in other countries. Do you agree with that?
So it would be very complicated for me to say that we have a good model of abortion care in Italy, but for sure the Italian feminist movement that led to that piece of legislation, the feminist mobilization that led eventually to the approval of this law that you were mentioning, Law 194 in 1978. I think the mobilization of the feminist movement is something we can draw lesson from, probably. Today, when we think about resisting abortion laws that are unjust. So if we take that perspective, I think that the Italian feminism in the 1978 has something to tell us today. I think about the very much spread mobilization that somehow was also unprecedented in the many Western countries around the self-managed abortion practice. So this means that there were several groups, many groups that were providing abortions using a technique called vacuum aspiration. In order to grant access to abortion, women at the time when there was still a ban, there were a lot of mobilization to organize abortion travel abroad, mainly in England, where there was already a legal provision for abortion. So in general, what I would say is that the Italian probably history, tell us of how important can be a social movement in shaping a law and how the law is also constitutive for the life of a social movement. And if we look closely to the case of abortion, it's definitely there is a trend, if we want to use this term, of partial decriminalization processes that are related to the incessant work of abortion groups. This is for sure true if we look at some example of the past, Italy, France, if we want to just make another close example, geographically speaking, but also if we look more recently, like at the new trend. So Professor Rebecca Cook-Bernard-Dickens, both from the University of Toronto, for example, have recently observed that in the past 25 years, around 50 countries have liberalized their abortion laws through legislations, through new legislations. And we know how much some of these legal reform are related with abortion campaigns. For example, in Ireland in 2018, in Argentina in 2020, this legal reform followed decades of feminist struggles for abortion. At the same time, we have to be also aware that beyond strong pro-choice movements, there are also other reasons why a legal reform can take place, and so that there are also other groups that can have an interest in lobbying for a liberal law reform on abortion, for example, medical doctors. And here I draw from the experience of the country where I've been living for a while, where I did my PhD, Great Britain, that offers some good example in this perspective. So Sally Sheldon from Bristol Law School, who also in her book Beyond Control, which this is also another link with the UI, was based on her PhD here at the UI. In this book, she offers a detailed study of the Abortion Act of 1967, which still today regulates abortion access in England, Scotland, and Wales. And she shows how this piece of legislation was approved and designed to protect the practice of medical doctors from the risk of criminalization. So again, looking at the case of Italy can be useful to see how there are a different type of experience. So this is why we need to have also knowledge, detailed knowledge sometimes of context and practice over time and spaces.
That's really interesting. So it seems you're saying that the law is a result of social movements, but also different societal groups campaigning to obtain recognition of certain rights or regulation of certain practices, but at the same time it's only a step, a wider process. And so the story doesn't start with the law and doesn't end with the law. I was also wondering, when you talked about medicalization of the law, or the law protecting doctors in a way, or medical practices, so it reminds me of something you say and you wrote in your research about hyper-regulation, for instance, that we can see in the Italian law on abortion. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by hyper-regulation and how this can have a great impact on abortion care and access to abortion?
So this is a great question. And in fact, I'm working to address this question during my time here at the UI, because it's true, there is a piece I wrote last year for the International Journal of Gynecologists that is entitled The Hyper-Regulation of Abortion Care in Italy, and this piece joins some also other legal scholars that have observed and referred to abortion regulation, not in relation to the Italian context, but tend to refer often to excessive, over or hyper-regulation when it comes to abortion care. I think of Carol Sanger, Chloe Romanis, just to make some example. What we mean when we say that there is an over-excessive of hyper-regulation of abortion is that we see that abortion is subjected to a legal status in the legal system, in most legal systems, that is exceptional in comparison to other health services and procedures. So what we mean is that abortion in this way, through these many levels of regulation and legislation, is not fully normalized in healthcare, and in a way this model of regulation of abortion reflects that the stigmatization of abortion in the legal system. However, I think there is still room to clarify what really hyperregulation means. And in fact, as I was saying, I'm working on the conceptualization of hyperregulation, and I'm trying to write about this. So to really answer in a comprehensive way to this question, we will probably have to wait the publication of this piece. That it will be part of a major abortion project that I'm conducting here, also with other two Max Weber fellows at the law department, Gauril Pillai and Carolina Cocemba. So it's more a work in progress, the answer to this question for me.
This is really fascinating, and it seems to me that when you're talking about hyperregulation and what's happening around studies and research on abortion rights and access to abortion care, you can see a sort of a new wave of studies and advocacy around this that maybe never stopped but changed as compared to what the debate was in the 70s. And so I was wondering, going back again to your roots as researcher and activist, so can you say that there has been a change in the way social movements and the social environment has changed and evolved in challenging laws or in shaping the law, or if the law affected social environment and the social movements differently now as compared to the past? Do you see an evolution in this sense, or a change?
So I think that it can be accurate to say that conservative political frameworks can provide very good conditions to radicalize social movements, including pro-choice movements. And for example, what we have witnessed in Poland, especially following the constitutional ruling of 2020 that declared the provision allowing for legal abortion in case of fetal abnormalities was unconstitutional. And this means that there is a near ban on abortion in the country under the current law. And that constitutional ruling of 2020 has contributed to make Poland the theater of one of the most creative, imaginative, and active movement in the West. And again, what we saw last year is that the trial against a human rights defender, Justyna Wydryska, that was found guilty to have tried to help a woman, a victim of domestic violence, to have an abortion in Poland, has turned to be a trial exposing the injustice and the repressive abortion laws in Poland. So if we have to find some kind of links between certain type of context and environments and the generation of counter-mobilization, so to speak, for sure a conservative political framework provides good conditions for the creation of social movements that want to oppose those strict conditions, in this case to access abortion. And again, this is something that we saw looking at historical cases like Italy and the contemporary situation, for example, in Poland, just to make two examples, one from decades ago and one from today.
So if we go back again to the concept of a hyperregulation, connecting it to a country where there is a conservative government. It makes me think of the fact that you can have a law that allows abortion, but then conservative government can use different techniques, I think, if you agree, to obstruct access to abortion. So there seems to be a difference between what the law says and how the law is applied. Do you agree, and do you have anything to say about this?
Yes, there can be definitely a gap, not only when we talk about abortion, between what the law says in books and what is the reality of that piece of legislation in the society. And here I'm going to quote again Sally Sheldon, but this time in relation to another work, a more recent book of her, which she co-authored with a team of historians, and is entitled The Abortion Act 1967, a biography of the UK law. So even if the focus is on Great Britain and abortion there, the original framework of the book is that a piece of legislation has its own life. And this means that it is possible to write the biography of this piece of legislation. So Sheldon argues that we cannot fully understand the law just in one moment in its existence, but we have to think of it as a living subject, always in the process of accumulating meaning. And so to answer to this question, so for example, if we think, since you were mentioning a conservative government, so we are here in Florence, in Italy. So to answer this question about Italy, what we are witnessing now is that although there is not a formal change in the way in which abortion is in the books, which means in the law 194/1968, of course this government will probably play an important role, and is already playing an important role, to shape new pages of this biography of the law 194. And probably the direction, we can already say this with some clarity, would be in the direction to make a more restrictive interpretation of its provision, in the direction to obstruct abortion services and make abortion services de facto very difficult to access in most parts of the country, in many places at least, across the whole country. So definitely a piece of legislation can have different lives. So for sure, what we would probably are witnessing already in Italy now is a new chapter, if we want to use this metaphor of the biography of the law, that probably would be not the most liberal page in terms of the type of interpretation of the law, and so of the type of services that will be provided.
I like this idea of biography of the law.
Me
and
too.
Making really the law as a living instrument and not just a textbook. I guess I'm not sure this can be applicable also to a system where there is the system of precedent, where the law changes through cases, through court cases. I'm not sure about it. Maybe you can tell us, but it made me think about two main trends that we are seeing right now. So we have countries like Italy, for example, where you still have a law, but it's restricted. Its application is restricted in different ways, and then you have probably I think it's the most apparent example of how abortion is banned, which is the US, where we had a decision of the Supreme Court, the Dobbs decision, who actually overturned Roe v. Wade, and so abortion is not a constitutional right anymore in the United States, and so the Supreme Court says you need to leave to individual states to decide if they want to afford access to abortion or not, and we saw that this led to a wave of restrictions that are very limiting for women's lives and women's rights. And so, I don't know, I think I'm just trying to say and to ask you, if both these processes lead to alternative ways for women or people who get pregnant to access abortion. And how do you see this process of accessing alternative ways? Is it risky, as I assume? And what are the consequences of these different forms of obstructions, these different ways of writing the biography of law or by jurisprudence, let's say?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And I think it's very important that you put in the question place that on paper as a liberal abortion law, which is Italy, although as we said is hyper-regulated and there are serious problems of access, with a country like the US that is now where in many states there are serious issues to access abortion. So what happens when the law make it difficult to women and pregnant people to access abortion? What we know is that in many cases, this does not automatically mean that these people will not have an abortion. Most of them will statistically seek for other routes. So one route can be abortion travel, which means that people travel where there is a law permitting abortion access. And for example, in this regard, if we want to also look at this context, I think of the work of the anthropologist Silvia De Zordo and her team from the University of Barcelona, who are tracking, she and her team, this phenomenon within the European countries, pointing out how overcoming strict gestational age limits represents a significant reason for some women and pregnant people to continue to travel for abortion, even if they come from countries with a, so to speak, a liberal abortion law. Another potential route to abortion is self-managed abortion. And self-managed abortion refers to the end of a pregnancy through the autonomous administration of pills outside the public health facility. So this is a safe method to end the pregnancy, according also to the WHO. So, for example, in its one of its recent guide entitled Abortion Care Guideline of March 2022, the WHO, the World Health Organization, recommended self-management for pregnancies under 12 weeks, using a combination of two pills, mifepristone and misoprostol, or misoprostol alone. WHO includes both medication, it's a model list of essential medicines. So this is a safe route to abortion access as well. And today, the use of these pills are really reshaping the landscape of illegal abortion. But still, of course, there is a lot of work to do if we think that still an estimated 7 million of women are hospitalized for complications related to unsafe abortion. And in most cases, these outcomes can likely be avoided through the use of affordable, safe, and effective medicine to end the pregnancy. So there is definitely still a problem around legalization and safety. But what self-managed abortion practice have shown is that there is not necessarily an equation between these two things. So there can be safe abortion that are illegally practiced.
This is really, really interesting. And so, yeah, we tend to think, that what's safe, it's also legal. But it seems here this opens, a different landscape in a way. In this perspective, I was thinking, so these new scenarios have changed in a way, approach that feminist movements or advocacy movements more broadly are adopting to ensure that people can access abortion care or can enjoy their reproductive rights and can enjoy their bodily autonomy. And since you were talking about doctors as well before, so how does the medical community has taken these new developments?
Self-managed abortion is in the terms that I refer as a public health facility practice, so as a practice that takes place outside the public health facility, in a way has been also legalized in some context. And in some countries, medical doctors are endorsing this practice, for example, in Great Britain, in France, because the evidence leads to the absolute safety of self-managed abortion. And so the same WHO guidelines, also medical doctors take part in it. But of course, this is an important question because self-managed abortion, not only this practice with the pills, but again, going back to the 70s, the practice of self-managed abortion with other techniques, such as the vacuum aspiration, because that was the technique that was used, for example, in Italy or in France in the 70s before the law reform. These were practices that contributed to create a critique around the role of the medical doctors in the procedure, and the fact that abortion can also be safely provided and performed without a medical supervision in most of the cases. So of course, self-managed abortion is another puzzle in this conversation about what role does the medical community need to have to provide a safe abortion. And we go back from this perspective to, again, the book of Sally Sheldon about the Beyond Control. And in that book, it's clear that the medicalization of abortion in Britain was a condition for the partial decriminalization of the procedure, but not necessarily responded to the desire to recognize bodily autonomy and recognition of women's rights necessarily. So self-managed abortion a little bit put again on the forefront of our agenda the need to think abortion as a women's right, as an issue. So what we claim is a quality abortion access, which also means that it's not enough for us to say that we don't want to die from abortions. We want to have a good abortion, a quality abortion access. And part of this is also to decide to self-manage abortion by our own if a doctor is not necessary, and to buy the pills freely and use them with our friends, because we know how to use these pills, are very, very easy to use, etc. So self-managed abortion is at the moment one of the main topic in the global debate, for sure among activists, and in a way also in the academic debate for those that work on these issues, because it's reframing many questions, including the one of legality, for example, as I said earlier.
I wonder if there is also a question of through self-managed abortion, you would give women a lot more freedom and autonomy in choosing what to do with their own body. I guess this option to have self-managed abortion goes also to one of the issues that I imagine disturbs men, in particular conservatives, more. That is that women can have control on their own body and their own bodily autonomy. And in this sense, so I'd like to connect again with the feminism and feminist theories and feminist movements. And so is this changing landscape changing also feminist movements, or creating new alliances or new approaches as compared to the past? Are feminist movements or feminist theory becoming more creative in a way?
As I said earlier, of course, restrictive frameworks tend to offer ideal conditions to galvanize, to radicalize a movement for legal change. So for sure, in some context, the mobilization around abortion access share with the past, if we want to see a trend, is that women and pregnant people find ways, collective ways, to resist against injustice, and self-managed abortion is part of this genealogy. So today is with the pills. It can change the technology, of course. Today, as I said, is the pills. In the 70s was vacuum aspiration in certain parts. In other was the curettage. If we think of, for example, the collective of the Janes in the US. But what we can see is that oppression creates condition for resistance. And what also can happen is that when there is a new abortion law, that is a liberal abortion law coming out, this doesn't stop necessarily the mobilization around around this topic. So how the law changed the mobilization around this topic is in reframing and reshaping the goals of these social movements. So, for example, when a liberal abortion law is approved, very often the feminist movements start working on ensuring a good application of the new law. So in a way, it's the only way to really stop and neutralize a feminist mobilization around topics like abortion is to grant an effective quality abortion access. This is the real way to neutralize our mobilization around these issues, if we want to drive some kind of trends across time and different spaces and countries and the legal context.
This makes me think to a follow-up question that maybe will need another podcast to be answered. So sorry in advance, but I was thinking about what happened in France and the fact that abortion was included in the constitution, is now a constitutional right. Is this the obvious answer would be yes, this is a good positive development, but is it really the case? What do you think about that? Or can you tell us something about the way it was introduced in the Constitution?
So most of us can tend to think that most law means automatically more protection, which is of course true. And of course, constitutionalizing abortion is a good and it's a welcoming achievement. If I think, for example, of the case in Italy, we don't have abortion explicitly in the Constitution, but it's a constitutional right. And since it's already a constitutional right, I will not see very helpful at this stage to organize our energies to put it in the constitutional, as explicitly to provide another provision that expressly recognizes abortion, because we already have that recognition. The Constitution already grants constitutional rights in Italy. So if we have to think about the best way to protect and to create an house for abortion rights, of course we have to look specifically at the context we are referring to, because every country has its own history, its own legal tradition and political traditions. But for example, I'm living in Canada, and I think that Canada provides a very, very good model to protect abortion. And it's a big country, but there is little knowledge about how common law knowledge, at least, how unique it's the type of legal arrangement that there is around abortion. So, for example, in Canada, there is not an expressively a recognition of abortion in a legal statute. But yet, so this means that abortion is fully decriminalized, is one of the few countries, certainly is the country that for more time has had a full decriminalization of abortion, more recently joined by Australia. So already for this, it's a good model to look at. And abortion is almost normalized in the healthcare system. So once we put, of course, abortion on the books and we exceptionalize it, because we codified it in a ad hoc piece of legislation, etc., we create also an argument to put that right out of the book. Because I think that we have to try to think of abortion as a normal health care, and this means that as a normal, safe procedure that many women and pregnant people have in their reproductive life. This should be reflected in the way we regulate it. And this means that abortion should be secure, of course, but should also be treated as any other part of healthcare services in the system. And the part of this is also regulating it accordingly in the closest possible way to normalize a procedure that, of course, is not like anyone. We have to be also attentive of the specific peculiarities that there are around abortion in many contexts, but also I think we have to make an effort also to try to shape a lower regulation on abortion that make really normal this procedure. So, for example, in thinking of the French case, I would prefer to look at Canada if I have to think about opening a debate in Italy. So for me, the point is we have to decriminalize fully abortion, because abortion is only partially decriminalized. It's still a crime in many cases. So for me, that is the priority, is decriminalization, for example. I don't think that is very useful at this stage, thinking of putting another amendment in the Constitution that continue to exceptionalize and doesn't add any protection, because we already have constitutional protection for this right.
So, but why do you think is it so difficult to normalize abortion? I know it's another $1 million question, but and there may be some obvious reasons linked with religion, in Italy, Catholicism, but really we have been able to make a lot of progress in normalizing other issues or other areas of healthcare, let's say. Why is abortion still so controversial?
Of course, the issue around abortion access is not new. So this is not a new problem for us women and for the society. The argument against abortion have also been different across times and space. So in the contemporary debate, for example, the fetus is probably the very much used argument against abortion, but this has not been always the case. So if we again we look at the Italian context, for example, before the 1978, abortion was criminalized under a title of the penal code that was in protection of the race. So there was no mention of the fetus. So the arguments against abortion are not always the same. And a full of recognition of the right to abortion means always the same thing, which is work for a society where we acknowledge that abortion is something very common, as I was saying earlier, that happen in the life of many women and pregnant people over their life, and this is just okay. And this means to recognize that women and pregnant people should make a decision about if and when they want to become a parent, and how many times they want to have an abortion or continue a pregnancy without any prejudice. And this is the real turning point when we talk about this topic. And the way to challenge this argument have changed, but we have always been asking the same thing.
Right. So thank you, Elena. We talked about different approaches to abortion access, different experiences, different countries. Do you have a sense, or I know it's difficult to make provisions for the future, but do you have a sense of where, let's say, the fight for abortion rights will go in the next future? Where do you see this movement towards expanding abortion care and abortion access go?
I would say that also as a person who knows me, knows this. I'm very optimistic.
Good.
And there is a global trend towards the decriminalization of abortion. From Colombia to Thailand to Australia was mentioning earlier, from Nepal to Korea, just to make a few very recent examples. So I think that the struggle for abortion access should revolve around the 4D. So there is a 4D model, which is decriminalization, demedicalization, destigmatization, and demystification of abortion. And my dear colleague Lucia Berro Pizzarossa from Birmingham Law School very recently pointed out that this 4D model was articulated by the organization Women Help Women in 2014. So now I'm talking to you 10 years later in 2024, and I still think that this 4D model is excellent, and it offers an excellent framework to build our abortion agenda today and tomorrow.
Thank you. That's really, really interesting. We're going to look more into this model for those of us who didn't know about this. So during this conversation, you mentioned a lot of authors and many researchers and professors who have studied or are studying researching here at the UI. But I just would like to end with a question that we asked to all our guests. So would you have any books or podcasts or movies to recommend, even songs, if you like, to recommend to our listeners?
So I'm more a book person probably, but so I want to recommend one very recent book by Sidney Calkin, who is a reader in human geography at the Queen Mary University of London. The book is entitled Abortion Pills Go Global, Reproductive Freedom Across Borders, and has been published by University of California Press. It is very well written, and it offers a first account of the global trajectory of these pills, with a specific focus on India, US, Poland, and Ireland. She shows how these pills, as many activists say, have feet and they move around the globe. And so this is definitely my recommendation for those of you who want to know more about global reproductive justice and how this global reproductive justice moves around abortion pills.
Thank you, Elena. That was really great to talk with you. And thank you to all of our listeners. You can find our podcast and this episode on YouTube and on the Radio Cavolo channels. So stay tuned and see you soon.